Hello and welcome to the second series of Monbiosis. Thanks very much indeed for joining us again. Now, in most of these programs, we'll be talking to people from the global south, people whose voices have been massively neglected on the whole. But today I want to talk to someone who's not from the global south, but has, well, I think some absolutely crucial things to say. And while in most programs we have a panel of guests, in this case, I just want to talk to him, and I think you'll find out why. What we want to discuss is something that's been troubling me more and more. I've been banging on about our existential climate and environmental crisis now for 37 years, and generally I've managed to hold it together by sort of intellectualizing the problem. But as I get older, I've found it's harder and harder. And so what I'm faced with, and what my guest is faced with and has been very frank and open and articulate about, is this question of psychic survival. How, knowing what we know, do we carry on? So I'd like to introduce Peter Kalmus. Well, I'll ask him to tell you who he is and what he does, who's been an absolutely crucial voice on this and many other topics. Peter, thank you very much for joining us. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I live in Los Angeles. I have a wife. I've got two teenage sons. Everything for me would be absolutely wonderful. I'm very fortunate, except for this one problem of rapidly accelerating global heating. So I am now a climate scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I've got to say that I'm speaking on my own behalf here. I think I wish our institutions were more willing to sort of speak out, but they have their own constraints, I guess, and maybe that's part of the problem here. But it's hard to imagine it being another way. It's somehow actually right now. But I became a climate scientist in 2012. Before that, I was an astrophysicist searching for gravitational waves. I couldn't keep doing that as I learned more about climate change and ecological breakdown. I kept reading papers about it, getting distracted from the astrophysics, feeling sort of guilty that I was, supposed to be doing astrophysics, but I was getting more and more into climate science. So eventually I made the shift. That's basically me. I like to coach soccer. I like to go backpacking. It's been kind of hard to go backpacking in the Sierra Nevada here in California because I've been seeing so many dead trees up there. Things are changing so fast that it doesn't feel like a vacation anymore. So, and I've been affected personally in the last couple of years by climate breakdown too, some very intense heat waves and some crazy mega fires that were happening nearby. So I've kind of decided to, just say what I really think, I guess. And that's why I reached out to you, George. And I said, let's just have a conversation and pretend like we're not getting recorded and just talk about this and say what we're really thinking.
Yeah. Now, we decided to have that conversation after we'd just both watched Don't Look Up and written about it. And as I expect most people watching this will be aware, and Don't Look Up is I think a very powerful satire on climate breakdown and our failure to engage properly with it. A couple of scientists discover a meteor, an asteroid heading towards planet Earth, which has the potential to wipe out everything, and they try to convince people of what's coming. And what struck me very forcefully about it, and about the reaction to it, was that people in our position, people who have been banging our heads against this wall of climate denial or climate disavowal or climate delay or just climate something other than taking the action which needs to be taken right now ism, got it straight away. It was just like, it hit us like a ton of bricks. Yeah, this is it. Finally, they're telling our story. This is how it is. Whereas so many people who haven't had that experience of just saying, what? Oh, no, it just didn't work for them in the way that it worked for us. And, I found it funny, compelling, engaging, all the rest of it. And a lot of these critics who haven't been involved at all in the environmental struggle were just saying, well, I didn't find it at all funny. It didn't do anything for me. Is that how you perceive the reaction as well, Peter?
Yeah. So, the two of us feel this emergency in our bones, and we think about it pretty much nonstop. And, we've devoted our lives basically to trying to create a shift in society, what I call a shift into emergency mode. And it's been an absolutely Sisyphean task, just trying to push against the cultural norms and being literally gaslighted. People throw that word around a lot, but that's what's happening. As a climate scientist, I see what's coming, like a train barreling down the track, and I see all society has to do is step out of the way of this train, and it's not doing it. It's running headlong toward disaster, just heedlessly and unnecessarily. And then I'm told, that I'm an alarmist. I'm told to stay in my lane as a scientist. Literally, one of the film critics, I think it was the New Yorker critic, basically said that, possibly in a response to a piece I wrote in The Guardian, to climate scientists should shut up about art like this. And it was so for the people who don't feel this in their bones and are invested in the status quo, staying the way it is. They've reached these positions of power. They've reached, their bank accounts have grown to a certain extent, and and I think critically they're sort of separated from the reality of what's happening. They're not on the front lines. They've got their nice air conditioning. I think for them, it's very hard and they don't really know the science, right? They don't know it deeply. So it's very easy to dismiss voices like ours that are saying that we're in a serious emergency, that this is irreversible, that many of Earth's life support systems are currently degrading and could quite rapidly and unpredictably get to a point where we have full-on civilization collapse. And we're not even really allowed to talk about that, right? And so these critics and these elite and these politicians and the media gatekeepers, frankly, who are all kind of this sort of like rich part of society, right? This rich kind of separated from reality in their bubble. I don't think they yet fully realize what an emergency we're really in. And that they don't have protection from it either, any more than we do. There's no place to run from this. We're on this tiny little planet in the vast void of space. This very, this incredibly beautiful place that literally caused us to be here and sustains us with its air, with its water, with its amazing food, with its protection from radiation, with its livable climate with good temperatures, right? Like all biological systems, we're incredibly sensitive to temperatures. So they haven't felt it in their bones. And I really felt with Don't Look Up, and I've spoken with Adam McKay, and I know he does feel this like we do, right? And so that's why he was able to make a film like that. But yeah, I really think that the film was fascinating to me for kind of revealing that very clearly, that divide, right? You don't like forget about, I'm not even talking about the climate deniers. Like in the United States, we have the Republican Party, and literally half of them, their congressional representatives in Congress, the senators and the representatives, literally half of the Republicans are on record saying this is a hoax, right? And then probably pretty much the rest of them don't want to see any action on climate, although they haven't said that the science is a hoax. It's a grand conspiracy by scientists, which is just absurd to think that we could even pull that off if we wanted to. Not to mention the fact that you can literally feel climate change with your body now, with these heat waves that we're getting, and with these floods that we're getting, and with the sunny day flooding in Florida. I mean, the level of disconnect from physical reality is just absolutely amazing. But I'm not even talking about those hardcore deniers, who I just can't, as a scientist, I just can't understand how their brain works. I'm talking about the people who will say that it's an existential crisis, who will say, listen to the scientists, who will, act like they understand the science and the implications of the science, but still pretend that everything is at some level okay. Still pretend that this isn't something that can, has the potential to literally take down civilization. I mean, we should talk a little bit later about what that actually kind of means, what that might mean. But they seem very much like they don't want our message to get out. They don't want us to talk about this. They don't talk about a rapid end to the fossil fuel industry, which is very obviously what has to happen, right? The sooner we end the fossil fuel industry, the more of this amazing planet and the more of our collective future we will save. It's as simple as that. And yet they talk about net zero by 2050, right? Which is such an embarrassing farce, right? It's so clearly designed to make it sound like they're doing something when they really aren't. So yeah, I was really thrilled when I watched the movie, because and then I was even more thrilled that it was mainstream. That was critical. If it had been like a little art house thing that no one had watched, it wouldn't have had the same emotional impact for me. And then I was amazed by all the discussion that happened. So it's just a Hollywood movie on one hand, but on the other hand, I think it was actually quite significant progress.
I think so too. And I think what was so important and has almost sort of licensed us to go there was, it showed scientists getting emotional about it. And one of the things that Professor Julia Steinbecker, who we had on a great episode of in the first series of Monbiosis, one of the things that she says is that people don't believe climate scientists because they don't appear to believe it themselves. If they really believed it, they would be crying. They would be showing the emotion, and instead they're saying, "Well, as the graph shows, and it's good to be objective. It's good to be an empiricist. Of course, we've got to have that. We have to have the facts, and we have to stick with the facts. But it's almost like a belief in academic circles that you have to sound like a machine when you're presenting the facts, and you have to do so dispassionately." You have to take your own emotions out of it, which of course is impossible, because we know that the sort of, the intellect and the emotions, they can't be separated anyway. But there's this sort of artificial, sort of Cartesian separation that we've created, separating ourselves from the real world within ourselves as well as the real world outside ourselves. And as a result, people say, well, I mean, they don't even say it, they think it. If you really believe this, you'd be tearing your hair out in front of our very eyes. But because you're not doing that, it can't be true. And she says that sort of at this deep level, there's that sort of that subliminal sense that, they don't really believe it. They're just saying it.
I completely agree with her on that. And it's been, I think the scientists, in terms of kind of creating this cultural change, are probably more important than they think. Most scientists didn't get into this to be activists, but when, as an astrophysicist, I was studying neutron stars, on the far side of our galaxy, and it was fascinating. Nature is a very beautiful thing, and to unlock nature's secrets like that through scientific equations and through observations, to me, it's a kind of art. It's a kind of spirituality. It's just beautiful, beautiful stuff. But there were no implications for humanity. My kids' futures and my kids' lives, and more my own future and my own life were not at stake. There was nothing threatening in the gravitational wave science for my kind of existence as a mammal on this spaceship that we call Earth. With the earth science, with the climate science, with the ecology, with the ecological forecasting and projection, with just the most fundamentals, what's changing so rapidly on this earth system right now, like much more quickly than we've seen in the 4.5 billion years that the planet has been around. I mean, this is really a remarkable time from just a perspective of planetary geology right now. So as a scientist, when you see that, personally, and my own kind of personal ethics, I feel like you have no choice. Like, you have to sound the alarm. You have to make the shift from just doing science to becoming a scientist activist. And I don't understand how you cannot do that. And I have a really kind of unique perspective, I think, on this as somebody who switched as essentially a mid-career scientist from physics into earth science. I remember distinctly the first few scientific talks about climate change I went to. They'll be talking about projections of flooding, or they'll be talking about projections of extreme heat, or they'll be talking about how rapidly the Amazon rainforest is approaching a tipping point. And to me, it's devastating emotionally to be sitting in that audience listening to this talk. And then they always end, 10 or 15 minutes early so that there's questions and answers. And then the questions are always about, particular details of the analysis and what data set they use. And there's never a discussion of how this affects them emotionally, or like how absolutely fucked up it is that we're talking about the loss of our planet dispassionately. So it even happens in rooms full of scientists. Like, when we go and have beers, we might cry a little bit, and we might express frustration and deep anger and the terror that a lot of us are feeling. But there's something about being in a group with 40 where these norms are so prevalent. And then as a very junior scientist, I start to do it now and again. I start to raise my hand and say, this is really affecting me. This is terrifying. Like, what, how do we approach policymakers? How do we approach the media? It's still a little unclear of how you broach that topic in that room with a bunch of scientists. But at least now that I'm a little bit more senior, it doesn't feel like when you're coming into someone else's house, right? As that when you're shifting fields like that. So it's a very weird feeling to be an extremely junior scientist with a very tenuous career situation, right? Being a postdoc, and kind of just trying to read the room and read the landscape while like my head was exploding by what I was hearing. So I still, even though I've been a climate scientist for 10 years now, it's still somewhat mysterious to me what is exactly what is going on inside the brains of all my colleagues. I even did a survey early on to kind of like when I first switched in to try to like get a handle on this, but yeah, I should probably redo it. My feeling is now that just like everyone else, there's a range of kind of, I might get in trouble for saying this, but actual climate denial, even among climate scientists, where it's so frightening what's happening that as a survival mechanism psychologically, there's some kind of a barrier, right? Where, and again, even arrayed against these scientific facts, which are absolutely undeniable at this point, and I would say undeniably terrifying. The cultural norms, the like every day, it's a pretty sunny day outside, right? When it's not a heat wave, or when it's not one of these new mega rainstorms, or when you don't have a cloud of wildfire smoke making you cough and making your extremities tingle because something there's toxins going into your blood that you don't understand. When that stuff's not happening, it's a beautiful day outside. You could get in your car and drive to the grocery store and buy food and take your kids to their soccer game or whatever it is, and everything seems normal. So I think those prevailing norms are just so incredibly strong, and then you can tend to glom onto those and kind of put up this barrier against all of the terrifying implications of the science that you are literally contributing to. So it's just a very, very surreal thing, and it's very weird to be a social human, like engaging socially and trying to figure out the most skillful way of doing that, because you can't just yell at people. They will ignore you if you do that. So you have to find a way to kind of push the whole thing forward as quickly as you can, right? But to do nothing, to just kind of uphold the norms, publish the papers, give the talks in a very, scientific way. That doesn't feel like pushing things forward as quickly as you can, right? So that's why I've adopted this kind of dual role of almost having two careers of, by daytime I do the science, and by night, I try to sound the alarm in whatever way I can. And I've tried dozens and dozens of different things to see what will work and what won't, and to try to kind of develop a platform to get my voice out there. So that's the balance that I've struck, right? So if you go too far and you just start screaming all the time, then at least the way things are now, with most people still kind of in denial, they'll just ignore you.
Yeah, what you say resonates very strongly for me, partly because I realised that I was in denial. I've been banging on about this stuff for all this time, for 37 years, just campaigning and writing and broadcasting whenever I can find a platform, and it's often been very difficult. There's a great hostility, particularly in the broadcast media, to discussing this.
Right. Which the film really, I think, highlighted
very effectively,
cleverly. Yes.
But in doing all this, I was doing it all with one half of my brain. I was just living in that rational side, which was just saying, yes, well, I've got to lay out the case, assemble the data and make the argument. I'm good at making an argument, so I sort of lay it all out and say, right, hypothesis, methodology, results, conclusion, but in column form, and hit people with it. This is what's happening, and all the time, like you say, going about my life, having children. If I wasn't in denial, would I have had children? I can't answer it. I mean, it's not. I don't have an honest answer to that, because it's just such. I can't even go there. I'm
the same way. Yeah. So I had both of my kids before I was really cognizant of what an emergency we were in, right? So, and then it's been a gradual process of waking up for me. I've had a meditation practice since 2003, which that's part of why I sort of speak out the way I do. So one of the things I get from my practice is this sense of coming out of myself and just being connected to everything, and not feeling like I'm me, sort of feeling like I'm I don't know how to say it, just like a part of this earth, I guess you could say. So somehow, like, very, it ebbs and flows, right? Sometimes, I'm more connected to that feeling of connection than other times. But when I am, it feels really like just, and I think about a lot of activists sort of feel this way, that we are literally the earth defending herself, right? And when you have that perspective, it becomes a lot easier, because you become much more fearless. It's a really reliable source of courage to make it not about you. And then there's like you brought up the kid thing, So I think a lot of parents have this profound sense when they have kids of suddenly coming out of their own sort of sense of selfishness in their own head, and your sense of time expands. You start to see the next generation, and then that quickly leads to seeing more generations. So you become less just like striving to get for yourself. I hope a lot of parents experience this, and you become much more interested in what's happening outside of you, especially with these little beings that you brought into the world that you want the best for. And you really feel how vulnerable you are as a parent, and in some ways powerless to protect them, because when you realize how interconnected everything is. So, I would, without hesitation, give my life for my kids. And I think, to me, as a dad, climate activism just kind of flows naturally out of that. I mean, I don't know. That's just the, I don't know what else to say. To me, it just seems like a very it feels like a very natural extension of being a parent. And I agree with you. Like sometimes I'm not sure that I would bring kids into this world as it is now, but then once you have kids, you can't really imagine not having them. So it's almost like the question doesn't really compute, right? Like the hypothetical.
Unless there's a very rapid, very drastic turnaround within the next, well, very few years, what do you see happening? What is the world going to look like?
Well, so we have projections. So for the next, until kind of the mid 2030s, the trajectory the physical trajectory of the Earth will feel very similar no matter what we do, but then starts to diverge, right? So if we keep burning fossil fuels, and can we just say how weird it is that there's an industry that's taking down our entire planet, which is run by people, these fossil fuel capitalists who won't stop. They're already filthy rich. They already have more money than any human could ever know what to do with, and they want more. And they'll lie, they'll cheat, they'll assassinate, they'll give political bribes. They'll buy up media corporations, all just to keep the fossil fuel flowing and to keep those profits flowing. And it's just absolutely remarkable to me that we've gotten to this place. There's a fascinating study that Jason Hickel mentions in his great book, Less is More, 2014. It was a Harvard-Yale study where they took the subjects and they basically ran a sort of simulation about whether it was like an economic experiment. Would you take all of the resources, cut down the entire forest, like fish all the fish, whatever, for your own profit? Or would you take what was sustainable, like what could be replaced by the ecosystem in real time, and therefore leave enough for future generations? And it was absolutely fascinating. It turns out that 68% of us would choose to leave enough for future generations. So there's only 32%, less than a third, of humans who do what classical economics would say they ought to do and just take as much for themselves as they can. And I consider those people basically sociopaths. And unfortunately, this is the problem we're in as a species trying to self-organize with our governments and our institutions, is unfortunately that selfish 32%, destructive, sociopathic 32%, they naturally rise to positions of leadership because most of us, 68% of us, we don't just want money, and more power. We want other things. We want, a good life for our kids. We want happiness. We want community. We want, to be able to, enjoy life, and to have a profound sense that things in the future will be okay and that we're going to leave, a good planet for kids and for future generations. But unfortunately, if all you want, your top priority is more money and more power, it's not really that hard to get those things if that's all you want. Right. And so they end up being the CEOs and the world leaders and the sort of fossil fuel capitalists who are willing to lie and cheat and misinform. So to me, it's just absolutely remarkable that we're at this point in history. And maybe it's been like this for a long time in this particular culture, this sort of post-Enlightenment, sort of colonialist, sometimes it's called Western culture, which really, again, elevates power and money. And so kind of has completely destroyed quite violently all of these other cultures, many of which didn't prioritize. So it's interesting. It's reflected not just on the individual scale, but also in terms of the myriad of cultures and societies that exist now on this planet and have existed for a long time. So to go back to your question, so first of all, the stuff that's happening now, the extreme heat waves, that's one of the things that keeps me up at night the most. Just the stupid, dumb, humid heat that is too much for your body to handle. Because I was on a hike one time. We get these, in the last few years, we've been getting these mega heat waves here in Los Angeles. And there was one I experienced to sort of, we went to a coastal forest to try to escape the projected heat wave, because I thought it would be, I was super busy doing, like, working on some paper or something. So I didn't like carefully look at the forecast and tried to figure it out. I just went to this forest near Santa Barbara, and it was incredibly hot and humid, and we're going for a little backpacking trip, and I had to just stop and go in a stream for a couple of hours, and I felt nauseous, and I had heat exhaustion. And it was like this really weird feeling of not, and this was even after dark, because it stayed hot so late, of not being able to breathe and feeling like you're sort of detached from the earth in some way, right? Because you're trying to get air in and you're trying to cool off, but it's not working. So like this connection that we normally take for granted to literally just the atmosphere kind of went out the window, and it was a very terrifying experience. So all of this stuff we're experiencing, people drowning in their basements in storms in New York City, the sea level rise, the agricultural impacts, the increasingly deadly humid heat, and then the geopolitical implications such as climate migrants, right? So a band around the equator of the planet is going to become increasingly uninhabitable. The human body won't be able to shed enough wattage of power to stay cool through sweating, because it's going to be too hot and humid in those places. So they're going to have to go more towards the poles. All of this stuff, you can just, every year on average, it's going to get worse until we end the fossil fuel industry. And then even for some number of years after that. But we need to end it so that we reach the peak, and then things start to come back down. And then if we keep, if we allow these sociopaths if we don't find a way to literally take power away from them, that's what has to happen now. I thought about this so intensely, George, for years. And it's such a weird thing to say as a scientist. But I just don't see any way out of it. Like, it seems clear that it would surprise me greatly if they actually woke up and said, oh my God, we feel this in our bones now, we have to change this. That doesn't seem to be how human psychology works. There might be rare exceptions to that, but they'll probably be replaced by the shareholders with, there's an infinite crop of new sociopaths, basically. So, and the institutions almost ensure that they will be leading it. So if we keep on this path of fossil fuel and we don't rapidly end the fossil fuel industry, then all of this stuff will just start to accelerate, especially after the mid 2030s. It's gonna be a rocky road even up until then, in my opinion. And then we're gonna start getting some, I think, really unpredictable stuff that's genuinely unpredictable, because the Earth system is so complex, and our human society and our human systems that depend on the Earth systems to function are also so complex that you're going to have, how can we predict how, multiple regional crop losses will interplay with a massive heat wave in, northern Africa, like sending tens of millions of how all of this stuff, and then you might have two nations that are starting to go to war. You might have Pakistan and India running out of water, and it could all these things will start to happen with more frequency. So there's a greater chance as we go forward that multiple such disasters will overlap, and then add that onto the economic and the geopolitics. I feel like there should at this point be a lot of academics and a rigorous discipline of, you could call it collapsology. I certainly think that we could still avoid the worst effects, but I think that the way we're not even, it's sort of taboo to even talk about this stuff, certainly not helping, because it's a collective denial, right, that we're still in. And how can we switch into emergency mode, which in my opinion, emergency mode would basically mean, like, saying to the fossil fuel industry, you guys have broken the social contract. you're taking our whole civilization towards collapse irreversibly. This stuff is irreversible, right? A lot of the impacts damaging our planet. So we're going to seize your assets and control prices, right, of fossil fuels, because we still need fossil fuels, but then, redirect fossil fuels to essential life or death sectors and start to ramp it down on a very clear plan. Year by year, we're going to reduce in this sector, then we're going to reduce in this sector. We're going to build out more renewables so we can run this sector without fossil fuel. And then eventually, maybe by 2030, we're completely done with the fossil fuel industry, all with a plan toward helping the global south sort of avoid the need to burn this much fossil fuel in the first place, right? That's what emergency mode would look like. And here in the United States, we're still completely politically deadlocked. So it's very hard to see how we get there.
And to get there, we need a rebellion against the sociopaths, don't we? And so
that's what I think.
And so finally, what does that look like?
Yes. So that's the existential question of this existential emergency. So I say we need 1 billion climate activists. That's a big statement. So I'm not talking about people signing on to petitions. I'm not even talking about people calling their representatives. I'm talking about direct action, and I'm talking about joining up with other people, joining groups, not staying silent whenever there's a chance to talk about this stuff, to speak about it, and then, causing some good trouble. It's unclear how it's going to go down, but if we get, and then, another critical piece of it, I think, is to break this mainstream silence, which is, again, why I was so happy about the movie Don't Look Up and the fact that it was mainstream. So you have the news media on one hand, then you have the entertainment media on the other hand, and they've both been almost silent about climate and ecological breakdown. So it's very hard to build a mass movement and get those billions of climate activists, out in the streets, with the pitchforks if necessary. I mean, this is increasingly going to be a life or death issue, and more, and it's hard to get that mass mobilization because it's like there's a decade or two time lag, right? So it was as a climate activist since 2006, I can tell you that before this stuff was starting to be sensible, before you were able to sense it with your own body the way you can now. And that's only happened really in the last few years. So in the 1990s, it was still a signal that we were trying to pull out of, with scientific methods, pull out of data sets. That was hard to see the signal in some places. Now it's just, hits you over the head. Spring is coming earlier. Plants and animals are migrating rapidly. The oceans are heating tremendously quickly. You can feel it when you go in the ocean. You get these massive heat waves in the wintertime. You get these massive wildfires, which has blown anything away that we've seen. So now you have massive rainstorms too. It's you can sense it. And so as a scientist, it was deeply frustrating that you couldn't get this sort of mobilization, this kind of movement with the public, based on projections of stuff that was going to happen in 10 or 20 years. So we lost, and the fossil fuel industry really leveraged that sort of the difficulty of having a movement based on abstraction and future projections. So it's very, very easy for the fossil fuel industry to misinform, call the scientific results into question, manufacture uncertainty that didn't exist. And we should say too that of course there's uncertainty, but about different aspects of it. But the overall temperature marching up and a lot of the main impacts have been very certain for a very long time. But they leveraged and now that we're here with being able to feel it in our bodies, we're having heat domes in very northern cities, up in Vancouver, up in Seattle. Like I said, there's no place to run. And as you get these impacts happening more in the global north, because I wish it were different, but a lot of people in the global north tend to sort of assume that it's always been burning in the global south, and it's all so it doesn't wake them up when there's climate disasters happening in the global south as much as it should. So more and more these kind of globally rich people in global north are starting to realize that this directly impacts them. It doesn't even impact their grandkids. It impacts them. Certainly impacts their kids. But they thought they could move up to British Columbia to escape climate impacts, and they realized they couldn't. And really, in my opinion, there's not really any place that you can escape to. Yeah. So, I think I'm hoping that the success of Don't Look Up leads to more sort of mainstream media discussion of just what an emergency we're in, and without pulling any punches, right? Just like depicted in Don't Look Up, right? That's sort of the kind of the media nicety. We're still at the point right now where sporting events, celebrity gossip gets an order of magnitude more clicks and discussion and coverage than the possible collapse of everything we know and love. It's just such a surreal thing. So we have to break through that somehow. That would help tremendously in terms of mobilizing the public. But again, the 32%, the sociopaths, they want to prevent that from happening, right? And so not only are they controlling the media, they're also generating laws to make climate direct action, a graver crime, and to try to stamp out the climate movement through sort of using the use of state violence and the sort of co-option of the legal system. Yeah. So that's where we're at. And I think we all just need to be creative. We all need to be courageous. I would encourage more and more people to get involved in direct action. Petitions don't work if the people you're petitioning don't give a shit, right? Yeah. So what do you think, George? How do you think we mobilized?
Yeah, well, mobilizing is the key thing. I think people like Extinction Rebellion, Sunrise Movement, Green New Deal Rising, they've shown the way to go. We just need 10 times, 100 times as many people out now on the streets. As you say, they're trying to crush us. They're trying to stop that from happening, but they're trying to stop it because they know it's latent power. They understand that once that is unleashed, they won't be able to stop it. And we've just got to unleash it. And we've got to just overwhelm their barricades. We've just got to push past all those legal instruments and things and say, well, hell yeah, okay, loads of us will go to prison. All right. But, that is a lot better outcome than everybody basically, dying. That is what we're talking about. We're talking about the collapse of our life support systems, and everybody and everything, either is wiped out or living in really appalling circumstances. Those who survive, this even being locked up in prison is preferable to that. And we have a duty. We have a duty to do that. Peter, I could talk to you all day about this. I'm loving it, but we've already overrun our time. It's a real shame because honestly,
I do feel amazing. Like we are just getting started with the conversation. It's kind of incredible. So we should probably try to do it again.
We need to reconvene. We need to do something else as well, and have that 6-hour conversation, which I think this needs to be. It feels I can really feel this needs to go on and on. But it's meant to be a half-hour slot. We've already pushed quite a lot of the way past that. I'm really sorry. Because honestly, you're so fascinating.
Well, it's like I think this is the kind of conversation we have to be having with more. It has to have nuance, and it has to be underpinned by the best available science and the best available sociology too. I should add. There's so much more to discuss, and I hope we can break out of the kind of what I would, call maybe bullshit conversations that have been happening up to now, and start telling it like it, and it's complicated too, because I do want to say that I don't believe that the human race is on the verge of extinction, but it's so weird to have to say that, because what I am talking about is potentially billions of deaths, and a large swath of the planet being uninhabitable, and an incredibly devastating, tragic loss and biodiversity that could last for the next 10 million years. So just cosmically speaking, the stakes here, this being the only place in the universe we know with life, are so incredibly high right now. In some sense, it's sort of a great honor to have the opportunity to protect this magnificent planet and all of the life upon it. And on the other hand, you wake up at 4 a.m. and with your heart palpitating and the sense of just feeling completely overwhelmed by how big of a charge that is. So I just want to end by saying I love all of the direct action people out there fighting, defending. You are the earth defending herself. And when I think about your courage and how society tries to, oppress you for protecting the earth, I get very emotional, and I hope you keep doing it, and I hope more people join you.
Well, thank you, Peter, for your own courage and your love, and I wish you all strength. Well, look, we'll definitely have that longer conversation. It needs to happen. You're such a crucial voice in all this, and it's just so refreshing to have a climate scientist saying it. It's so refreshing to hear someone who they can't dismiss. They can't say, "Oh, what do you know?" Because 1,000 times more than they'll ever know. But speaking from the heart as well as from the head. So I honour you for that, and thank you. And
likewise, George. You're a source of inspiration and strength to me and to many. So thank you for doing what you're doing. I know it's not easy. It may look easy, but it's not.
No. Thank you, Peter.